morning. Thank you for joining our webinar today. This is part 3 of our series, How to Accelerate Agile. Today, we're going to focus on organizational silos. My name is Kelly Hamilton, and I'm going to be your moderator today. Before we get started, we really want today's webinar to be as interactive as possible. So I want to go over 3 things before we start. First, we welcome your questions throughout the webinar. We'll answer all those at the end in the Q&A session. So anytime you have a question, please feel free to go into the question and answer panel on your screen, write in a question, send it to us, and we'll get to all those at the end. In addition, the slides are compatible and can change sizes. So at some point today, you want to change to make the slide section bigger or the video pictures bigger, all you have to do is hit the expand button, and you can drag it to any size that you want on your mobile phone or your desktop. In addition, we've got some resources that we've added to the right of your screen. So this includes all of the presentation slides for today. In addition, if you haven't seen part 1 and part 2 of our series, you can click on those and go directly to those videos as well. Finally, we're recording today's webinar. So once we're done, we will take the recording, we'll send it out to you guys probably tomorrow. We'd love it if this is beneficial, if you want to share it with your colleagues or watch it again at any point. So with that, I would like to introduce you to today's speakers. We have Bhavani Krishnan, who's an Agile expert with over a decade of experience with Agile transformations at Fortune 500 and federal organizations. She believes change begins with the heart of the individual and ripples through the collective mindset of the organization. Bhavani surfaces and resolves the fear that underlying change by seeking all perspectives and striving for a renewed connection between people in a way that naturally supports adaptive thinking. She's a certified Agile leadership credentials through Scrum Alliance. Mason is the Chief Transformation Officer for Excion, and he led the development of our Agile Adoption Maturity Model, which is designed to help organizations tackle the complexities of adopting, scaling, and improving Agile practices across their enterprise. With that, I'd like to turn it over to you, Mason.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks, Bhavani, for joining us again, and thank you everyone on the line. I'm very excited about today's webinar. This is, I think, the finale of our 3-part series, and I think today's topic resonates with anyone who works within a team, within an enterprise. Touch on organizational silos. And organizational silos exist everywhere. They're going to exist next 100 years. I don't care how much technology evolves, we as people have to figure out how to break down silos. And I want to start today's conversation before we jump in with Bhavani on a couple of numbers. Everyone's talking about speed to value, getting products out the door faster, business seamlessness in business operations, working as a team between business and IT, breaking down that wall. Yet majority of individuals that are usually asked, where does your organization stand, will tell you that collaboration still isn't there. I mean, even greater than 50% of people are saying, you know what, be it leaders, be it practitioners, we do not collaborate well enough. And so with that today, I'm excited to take a different format with Bhavani. I look forward to debating with her, agreeing with her, and disagreeing with her on what leads to organizational silos and how do you tackle them. And so with that, I think we should jump right in. And so, Bhavani, a lot of organizations say we want business agility. We want to deliver faster. Innovation is key to the survival of our business. It's a cultural shift. It's not an adoption. Yet conflicted leadership, goals that are different, really hold people back, because at the end of the day, my goals, my team's goals might be totally different than yours. What gives?
So thank you very much for having me over again. So Mason, I would like to understand your question a little bit better. So when you're saying, you know, the organizations are coming together, but just expand a little bit on the question for me.
So like if we're in Enterprise X, and Enterprise X says we are going to build the best products for our customers in an omni-channel presence, and we're going to work seamlessly on the inside. Yet businesses KPIs, OKRs are vastly different than ITs or any other groups. That little pendulum you see in there, it swings wildly. And so we on the surface can say, look at the big picture, but our differences in goals and aspirations are so different that it's hard to connect. And that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, you're right. And that, in that matter, I would say it's because exactly how you're saying, right? Different departments, different goals. When they are in the same organizations, they're not thinking about the big picture. Like every organization has a big picture. They have their own mission, they have their own vision and goal and all of that. But is the management, the leadership, are they connecting that big picture with the individual departments, right? So if you take just any software organization, right, the functional structure of that, you have analysis, you have development, you have testing, and those are, disparate groups, right? But they all work towards the same goal of delivery. And that becomes very hard if, the QA organization or even like the QA department has their own goals of, hey, my goal is to find X number of defects, then you're actually working against your partners of the developers, right? The development area. So I think organizations and the leaders have to do a better job of connecting them together, helping them understand that, hey, you're working towards that big goal of delivery, big goal of customer satisfaction. Because I tell you, the customers at the end of the day will assume all of this. They will know because, if you're not unified, your delivery is going to be delayed. Your cost is going to be upwards. You are going to see people who are disengaged. And I read somewhere that I think the global satisfaction of engagement from people who are working together is only 13%. And that's like worldwide. And that's really, really alarming. Mason, I cannot hear you. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. What I was saying is, if my team's goal is to reduce defects and find automation, and that's all we strive for, and you on the business end are more focused on the customer, we do not, in theory, we're talking Agile, but in reality, we're not. So, the takeaway I take from your first thought is it starts with leadership. And then when I mention leadership, it's not all the way up to the CEO and C-suite. Even directors and VPs have to realize that you've got to align goals amongst this level of leaders. And if this level of leaders say, you know what, we're looking at mission control, we know where we're headed. So even if I'm looking at defects or I'm looking at customer needs, a customer journey, whatever it may be, let's align that. What I'm taking away is that really should be prioritized going into 2020. Is that right?
It should be prioritized, but at the same time, a little bit of healthy competition is okay. I'm not against that. I'm not advising against that. But, it shouldn't come to a point where the testers are only working on finding, just as many defects because they are incentivized on the number of defects. And on the other hand, I've seen a lot of developers where, the testers are asking for, hey, you finished your development, you finished your coding, you must have, some kind of unit test that you would, you should be able to share. And I've heard developers say that, that's not my job. That's, your job as a tester. You should be able to go and, you should be able to write the test cases. And the common understanding there is the developers are thinking that the testers are asking for these test cases because they're lazy, but that's not the case though, right? Because the testers are asking for that only so they can cover more scenarios, more areas. So I think that's important to know that, the healthy competition is good, but up to a certain level.
Yep. So let's use that as a segue. You mentioned developers, you mentioned testers. I'm talking about managers, and I'm talking about leaders. So let's talk about this true first barrier, roles and responsibilities. I, in a previous life, was a program manager in a very segmented team. You knew who represented business. You understood who the architects and the designers were. You had your developers, and they were totally segregated from testers. And those folks were separated from operations when you went to deployment. And then every level of management was very spelled out. It's 2020. We're focused on product management. We're all aligned to getting that product out the door. Internal customer, external customer. We're all preaching cross-functional teams. In this new paradigm shift, what are the pros and cons? What's the good, bad, and the ugly, Bhavani, with all of this change to cross-functional teams?
So I'll tell you that in a little bit, but I want to, bring some focus into what really cross-functional team means. What does it really mean, right? I mean, in general terms, it means that, it's a group of people with different functional, expertise working towards the common goal. But does that really jive in with how the organizations are set up today? I don't think so. There's a misunderstanding. Because when you're standing up teams, I've heard a lot of times, they say, a project manager can become a scrum master. And that's the common misunderstanding. When we're saying that you need to have cross-functional teams, we're saying, you should have a self-manageable team, self-sustained team that has an analyst, a developer, a tester, and, maybe even somebody from the EM and the CM. So all those areas put together, that's a cross-functional team. And when you do have that, then you would, get the benefits of what you are actually expecting for. And you asked about the goods for, the cross-functional team. The big benefit of having a cross-functional team is that they are self-contained. They can manage every aspect of your software, life cycle, right? Software development life cycle. They are within themselves. They're not dependent on, an external area or an external team. And when you do have a self-contained team, you can actually predict. I mean, you can predict their velocity, you can understand, you can forecast. But if you keep them outside of the team, when you don't have a cross-functional team, your delivery gets delayed because then you're actually dependent on an outside entity, right? So that's one example of the good. Now, the bad, again, is the very basis of what we're talking today, the silos, right? Because they are coming from the different areas and the different organizations, they bring in their own agenda, right? Like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and so I'm going to expand on what you're saying. A lot of organizations think it's a semantics change. Mason was a project manager, and tomorrow he's a scrum master because we've gone agile. And it doesn't work that way. Or you've got organizations that say, you know what, Bhavani's a technical scrum master and Mason is a non-technical scrum master. I mean, it's this type of division in role types and responsibilities that creates silos. I mean, if we're going to have scrum masters and we're going to be a scrum organization, there should be uniformity within these roles. I get people have different skill sets. Some people might be a bit more versed working in a technical environment compared to someone else, but the role should be the same. Would you agree?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the responsibilities, I think, for the roles should be explained clearly, Mason. When you have the opportunity, if your organization is going through the initial, adoption or even transformation, set the expectations straight. Set the standards, explain to your folks, what are your roles and what are the boundaries of those. Because again, I'm not saying that a project manager cannot become a scrum master if that person has, the drive for that. And if that person is skilled and is knowledgeable for that, that's different, right? But you can't say, I have a project manager, the project manager equals to a scrum master. There's fundamental differences between the roles and, what the skill set that you're looking for. I mean, project manager, again, is more commanding, more demanding, and they look for the statuses, and they're right in there, within their boundaries, within their roles. But
Absolutely.
The Scrum Master is more of a facilitator. The Scrum Master is more of an enabler, right? So
Absolutely.
He's not looking for the status. He is trying to enable. He is trying to remove the distractions from the team. So that's just an example of just a subtle difference in what you might think is a subtle difference is really, really big.
All right, so let's move on. So far we're saying start from the top, identify the requirement of breaking down these silos, create nominal roles and responsibilities that have uniformity in your enterprise. Doesn't matter if you're ginormous, you're Fortune 100, or you're an association, you've got to clearly define roles. So once we move past the individual role, Bhavani, we start talking about teams. And now we're saying, okay, now we've got these set teams, but different teams, different strokes. How does one reconcile the goals and output of various teams? There's organizations that say, you know what, we're set. We're the InfoSec group. We're the development group. We're the product group. These teams, where does their alignment come together? Because again, I bring up that your goals are not my goals. If my team's goals are to ensure I meet a deadline for code and yours are customer related, how do we reconcile it?
So I'm just going to say it, right? Because when you ask or when you talk about, the disparate teams and, my goals are not your goals. I mean, why does an organization really have conflicted teams? I mean, isn't that the leadership's job to, influence that? And when they are not doing that, I kind of think that, it's the leadership that kind of shapes that, wherein, your leader should be in a position not to tolerate this toxic culture of silo, right? And when you're not taking the effort, when you're not looking for the signs, you're kind of like missing out on those. And
but Bhavani, let me challenge you here, though. What can leaders do with other leaders? If all the practitioners want this, the teams want it, what if you and I are VPs or directors of various groups, what can we be doing to make this better?
So if I were in that position, right, I will look for the signs of, possible signs of silos. The first one is broken communication. So if you are not hearing the same thing that the team members are hearing, or if you're hearing something totally different, then that's the broken communication. A lot of times, so I'll give you an example, right? I'll give you a case study. So I remember working with a client, and they, went through a major reorg, and all of us can relate to this, right? Our organizations, big or small, they go through reorgs. And during that reorg, they had, again, they wanted to have cross-functional teams. And in that, they kind of went the normal route of, we will have dotted lines. So we will have, like QA managers, development managers and whatnot. But then, we will have a delivery manager for a team that they are responsible for delivering the product or the software. And within that team, they will be able to, report to the delivery manager. So they are dotted lines to that delivery manager. Okay, fair enough. But had that really been communicated to, the individual departments, they kind of missed on that. And you see how big that is. It's like, okay, so the delivery manager was made responsible, where the developers, the testers, so everybody in the team was responsible for or accountable to the delivery manager, but then that was not communicated all the way down to the teams. So if there was any disengagement or any, anything that the teams did not agree on, any disagreement, the testers would directly go to their director or their manager. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing I would say that the leader should look for is, the signs of lack of collaboration. If the team is not collaborating on it, that's again another red, flag that you have to keep in mind.
Just real quick, is that something maybe we could share with our audience, be it after this webinar at some point? I would love to be able to share those signs with folks, because I'm sure they're seeing the signs in their respective enterprises.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we can share some tips and some guidance around that. Yeah. So the next thing I would say is, look for the broken customer experience. And you will get that, if you don't have, teams that are engaged with customers, if you don't have anything to collect feedback from them, I would recommend that you do, because that's how you would understand that. And the biggest, the biggest sign to look for is task duplication. Because you have disparate teams, because you have, external entities, it's really, really easy for teams to, duplicate each other's tasks. And think about it, right? You're duplicating tasks, but then you're wasting your resources, you're wasting your time, you're wasting your money. So all in all, they all come together. But again, so I kind of like lay down just maybe the high level four, but I can think of more that we can put together and then share with the audience.
So, I mean, yeah, so a takeaway here as we move to the next topic is if the leaders that are on this webinar listening, 2020 is the year to add this to your agenda for improving the OKRs on your teams. You've got to work with other leaders and figuring out ways to reduce friction, to reduce rework. And as Bhavani's saying, there are signs. And if you do not see the signs, reach out to us. We'll kind of show you, as Ace of Base would have said, we'll show you the sign. So with that, I move to a topic that's in the news quite a bit, but in a different way, politics, the elephant in the room. Everywhere I've ever worked, from my parents' surf shop when I was a kid to large enterprises, there's always politics. And those politics are from the C-suite to the VPs to the mid-level to the folks actually sitting on a scrum team coding. And politics are never going away. It doesn't matter if you spend money on classes and education, these types of things will be there. I mean, folks are going to always debate on what their turf is and who should be covering scope and what do the requirements actually mean. Bhavani, I know this is $1 million, maybe $1 billion question, but what can organizations, leaders, and practitioners do to tamp down as much as possible on the political element?
So I would say, again, you're right. This is, $1 billion question. And I don't know if there is just one right or wrong answer. But, as far as the leadership, I would, recommend that they are really vigilant about, these signs. Because, again, no leader in an organization wakes up one day and then says, I'm going to go to the office today and I'm going to promote the toxic politics, right? They're not. It just happens so. It's when what should be one unified organizational, goal becomes kind of territorial, right? And I keep using the same example because everybody can really, really resonate to this is, when you have, the different departments within the software entity, it's just so easy to become, your own, to make that your own kingdom, right? Is like, oh, I own the delivery shop. So, I'm kind of my own king and I can do, whatever I need to get the goals to where it needs to be. But when you let it continue, it kind of becomes a power struggle, right? And it results in reduced efficiency and low morale and, compromised customer experience. So, you asked about what they can do. I don't know if you can really, break down the silo, but you can definitely create bridges, right? You can share the vision with everyone and make it a common goal when it comes to...
Bhavani, forgive me for interrupting, but let me give you an example. Maybe you can help me tackle it. So if there's an organization in which business and IT they're pretty divided. In that instance, we all know in a perfect world, IT should be supporting business objectives. We're all on the same team. We're all there to serve the customer. But if there is that clear dividing line in between business and IT, and you were put in a room with business and IT leaders, what tips would you give them? I know you'd preach to them that you guys need to be seamless and frictionless, but what tips would you give them to get that process started?
So again, like you said, I would definitely preach to them that there should not be a clear division because that's the first thing that they're doing wrong. If there is, a clear cut division between this is IT and this is business, your functions may be different. The ask from you may be different, but then you are actually marching towards the same goal, right? But let's, for the sake of argument, say that there is a clear cut division. As I said, if you cannot break it down, maybe you can create bridges, right? You can maybe create links that connects the different create links with the different individuals to connect the different silos. There could be, liaisons between the two areas where, you have maybe a business rep, and then you also have an IT rep. They can come together and talk about, hey, this is the main goal, and here's the, big vision. And let's say the business says, my goal or my vision is to, or my roadmap is, to release something in 6 months. And then the business, the IT can come together and then say, we can do that, but, we probably will need, X number of resources and X number of budget in time to release for what you're asking for. You see what I mean? So there can be negotiations. It's just that, I can't really come and say that, yes, they can be two separate entities and then you would still be able to successfully deliver something. It just doesn't happen. That's not the equation that, an organization should function on.
No, I agree with you. And you know what, just before we move to our next topic, I want to give an example of what you're saying. I mean, I love what you're talking about bringing reps from each side. I mean, if organizations are undertaking new initiatives, new technology implementation, an M&A, whatever it may be, if there's representation from both or various groups that creates a super group, and that super group's initiative and goals are to make that initiative come to life, then everyone's represented. And then, here's the political nature of it. My person who represents me is in that group. So I've got to trust the decisions they're making. And a lot of times that brings leaders together. So I definitely am on board with what you're suggesting. So as a segue, a lot of organizations purposely divide their teams. And I'm going to describe that in a second. I personally am a fan of the bi-modal approach to IT. Gartner, many years ago, coined the term that, if you are a large legacy enterprise and you want to start doing innovative things, maybe it's time for you to carve out an agile niche to your organization. Keep your lights on, let those teams operate, but in that niche part, innovate. Go past your gating, go past your rules, and make things happen. Be disruptive. While it brings a lot of value to stagnant organizations with inertia, what you're in essence doing is creating these segregated groups. And what I'd like to ask you on this is there a positive, agile, lean way of going down the bimodal path that doesn't disrupt the whole apple cart?
So definitely, right? It's good that you're bringing this because a lot of organizations today are going through this. It's kind of like become a phase where in order for you to move to the next generation, you have to keep the lights on, and it's not really that hard to get off your legacy systems in one night, overnight, and then go over to the newer applications. So yes. Some again, there are different approaches. Some places, they have teams that are dedicated towards, keeping the lights on. Some people, they call them, run and maintain team. Some people call them, keep the lights on team. But you got to also think about, their motivation, their, the team morale for the teams that are working on legacy applications. You don't want to, give the indication to them that, it shouldn't become a punishment for them because they know the legacy systems. You know what I mean?
Because no one wants to get sunsetted out, and we all want to be on the next wave of tech. And so if you were running an organization, Bhavani, or you were advising, let's use a better example. If you were advising an organization on how to maintain opportunity, morale, and a path for folks that are on the legacy side of this equation, what would you suggest from an agile path?
So I'm going to take a tactical example to this, right? So we've been talking about at the strategic level, but I would like to give a tactical example here. So one of my clients, they had to go through this, and what they had was a 4 years backlog of defects that they needed to reduce, that they needed to get off of. 4 years 4 years worth of defects, and all of these were coming from the legacy systems. And the newer applications, they had put in teams for that. They had newer people for that. They were given new laptops or whatnot with new cutting edge technology and all of that. So from the other side, when you see from the legacy side, when you see that the shinier laptop, the newer people, the newer, areas and all of that. So when they look at it, it kind of, brought them really down. And then the manager, when I spoke to them, when I went there, they said, the team morale is really, really low with the legacy app, within the legacy app area. And I'm like, no wonder, because, you're incentivizing the newer teams, but then you are completely forgetting about the other side. And so what we had suggested was, maybe you can create a holistic team, right? In terms of, all right, create a backlog of all the defects that you have and see which ones can actually go into the newer teams and see if you can really, shift that mindset in terms of, the newer teams will only work on the newer technology. It doesn't have to be, right? No. There could be a better way. There could be a newer way, where you can pair the two together. So that's what we did. And that worked out really well, where the teams were put together in terms of soup to nuts. So it was not just a run and maintain team. That product team kind of owned everything from top to bottom, right? And they actually dedicated, I believe it was 5 to 10% of their sprint capacity that they dedicated towards reducing the backlog. So the legacy people, they got to work on newer stuff as well. They were able to create new products and software and newer applications. And then the new, or on the other side, those teams were able to learn, mainframe and change management and other applications too. So that kind of brought everybody together, and it helped improve their velocity as well, because everybody was together. Everybody was working towards the same goal.
And that makes sense. And I want to give you a value add of what you're describing. You're talking about at a personal level, but let's think about the value to the organization. If you take the approach you're describing, where you say engineers, if we have SQL DBAs, whoever it may be, that we're going to rotate you on legacy work and some of our newer work. Not only are you cross-pollinating skill sets, but you're also preparing your legacy teams for the day when you migrate off of your legacy technology. So it's not that you've only put certain folks to create new things in a corner. You're pretty much prepping everyone. And I think that's an approach that can work in a lot of size organizations, especially mid and larger. And that's Yeah, go ahead.
Can I also add one thing there, though? So we're talking about the pros for the legacy and the old timers, but there's also this aspect where, these legacy old timers kind of treat themselves as irreplaceable, right?
I'm legacy old timer, Bhavani, just as an FYI. Go on.
I didn't mean any harm, but I come across this a lot of times where these mainframers, nothing against them, but I'm sure a lot of organizations deal with this, right? They're or they consider themselves as I cannot be touched. They're untouchables. So when you put them together with the newer applications and then those teams, they kind of understand that, no, I'm supposed to teach this for other people as well. Yeah. So, I kind of have to let go of my attitude of nobody can touch me or nothing can happen to me. And as long as you have mainframe applications, my job is secure, right? And that kind of attitude is really, really not good for your team. And that's toxic and that's divisive as well.
Well, it's interesting. You are absolutely correct. And the type of approach, again, that you describe also allows leaders to determine what their workforce plan here is. Because if you've got folks who are saying, I will only work on what I know or what I've done for a long period of time, it also allows you to screen those who are interested in moving into new tech.
Exactly.
So with that, that's a great segue to our next topic. A lot of organizations have great agility aspiration. They're mandated from up top that we are going to be a digitally transformed organization. We're going to be data driven. We're going to be seamless. We're going to be lean. all these amazing things, but what they want to promote, what their KPIs and OKRs indicate, are vastly different than the way they operate. And I'm going to give an example before I hand it over to you. You can have an organization that says, we are not only going to develop things in an agile manner, but we're going to ideate in an agile manner. We're going to have folks with a customer feedback loop. We're going to have product owners that are going to constantly be the CEO of our products. We're going to have business people, business folks working in a scrum manner in sprints. Yet, the way they actually hire, rate their folks, pay their folks, promote their folks is vastly different than what Agile teaches. So Bhavani, and this is just one example, how does functional structure prevent organizations from breaking these silos?
It's really, you're right, and you were talking about just the functional structure. I would take it a little bit further, and I would say, depending on how your organization is structured, if you have distributed teams, then you have, the added mix of geographical structure there, right? And when we're talking about just the silos within the functional structure, that to me is easier to handle because, that's just within the smaller functions and within that one area. But when you can't even handle that, how can you even talk about having distributed teams? And in today's world, it's inevitable to have teams outside of just one geographical area, right? You can not, any longer have, not have teams outside of Americas, outside of, the country here. So it's just really, really hard. And I remember, coaching at a major consumer goods company, there were multiple teams in different areas, and whether it was Europe, Asia, or Americas, and they had their IT, HR, and business teams trying to adopt Agile best practices. And because their teams, because their job functions were so different, there were national occupational barriers, right? And on top of that, they had these geographical divisions, and that in further introduced cultural silos. What worked for one team here did not work for a team, in India. I'll take India as an example, right? Examples of the challenges were the team would sit through planning and come into, let's say, 50 points, but, they know historically that they cannot meet the 50 points. And they have been only able to meet 18 to 20 points in a sprint. But then I'm sitting here with my mind boggling. I'm then why did the team really say that they're going to take 50 points? And the answer to that I found out was, it's the cultural silo, right? It's one group was more practical than the other. And, we talked about cultural differences and cultural unity in our last webinar. And, culture influences a lot on the mindset and how one functions, right? So all in all, a solution to this, what we did was we kind of stood up local teams as champions. And you can do that even for the functional teams, even if you have just one location, just, the vanilla approach or the vanilla team, you can create local champions for them. And
but one sec, I want to throw a problem at you, and then you solve what you're saying. If I am a resource manager, and my job requirement is to ensure that there are developers and scrum masters available for X amount of projects, I have FTEs, I'm leveraging 3 vendors for contractors. Tell me how I'm going to meet the set team and Agile goals that are set out while I'm being judged on, can I fill the roles and squeeze blood out of a turnip with all the folks I have and the budget I have?
You can't. You're going to fail there miserably. You really are. Because, the very barrier that you're talking about, that the FTE versus the 3 vendors, it's a wrong approach, right?
Reality.
Because It's a reality, and that's why you're seeing that companies are or the teams are not being successful, right? In my experience, I probably have seen only a handful where, they bring in the vendors for their knowledge. And I understand you want to squeeze the time out of them. You want to, make your project successful and profitable, but take the money problem out of the table, right? There's actually the Scaled Agile framework. They have 6 themes that they explain, and one of them is this. They're like, take the money, take the carrot out of the table, and let them work on the goal. Let them work on, people are innovative, Mason, and knowledge is really, talent is really available to you. So bank on that, right? Rather than, just bringing them in and treating them as a body in your team. I'm really passionate about that. So, I can keep going on and on.
But in that example, say there's no choice but to have a blend of FTE and contractors. As a resource manager or a leader in that organization, would you set teams and say, what I'm hearing from you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is take the dollar part out of it. You're already spending money on contractors. Set your teams and stick with them so that there is uniformity in their goals, so that the vendors aren't worried about what they're producing. They're worried about what the goal of the team is rather than their own individual goal or the goal of the vendor. Is that right?
Right. So I will say 2 things there, right? One would be to hire for the attitude and the cultural fit, right? Even if you are bringing vendors, you can still say that, I need people that are going to be a fit for my team that can fit for an agile culture. And you can still, and you can still bring the right people and the right mix in there too. And this goes a long way for especially the FTEs. And the other thing I would say is, support the impactful learning and growth. It's really, really important because, you want to be able to create a learning organization. And, you want to be able to attract talent to an organization where your goals are more towards creating that learning experience rather than just, get the body in there and then get the work done.
And that's an interesting perspective. And I want to segue with what you just said. So the takeaway here is, and I'm sure a majority of individuals who are listening today work with contractors, and that's nothing wrong with it. There's a skills gap in this country that's only going to get worse, and there are going to be times where you don't need some specialty SME for the entirety of your organization. You need someone for 6-7 months. But what I'm taking away from you is you can't always go with the lowest price. You've got to, like this picture indicates, there's got to be a semblance of uniformity in the way you think. Organizations that you bring in need to understand the way your culture works, the way your organization works.
Absolutely.
So that's great. So that's a segue. And so we come to barrier 6, culture. And in culture, I think leaders of all types of organizations have attended conferences, have understood in classes that there is truly value in taking out friction in process. There's a reason why automation tools are so popular right now. There's a reason why automation across the SDLC is so popular right now. And there's a reason why folks from business sit with IT, that sit with ops, because you want to remove friction. Now, all of that's well and good. You can try doing it piecemeal, which most organizations are. But without that culture, without promotion of that culture, a lot of organizations face inertia. So, Bhavani, tell us, folks listening, what would you tell them to promote, no matter what level they're at, about this culture of frictionlessness?
So, we actually talked a lot about this, right? So I'm going to take on a different, not an approach, but I'm going to ask the audience, and in the audience, if we have leaders, I would really like for them to think if they're doing this. And they have a very big and an important role in their organization to influence the culture. And, if we have silos in an organization, and if the silos are, getting stronger and stronger and stronger, then that's because the leadership has not put themselves out there talking about this as a big problem, right? So I always recommend, don't just talk about the culture. Don't just talk about, the agility and the transformation and the adoption in your closed room. How many of the leaders, if we have like VPs and such, how many of you have really reached out to a team member at the bottom level, right? And I don't mean bottom in a negative connotation, but I mean like at the team level, right? How many of you have taken the time to talk to a developer or a tester, and especially if there are vendors, right? If he's a contractor, how many of you have gone to them and talked to them and asked them this question? Do you understand what's the vision of the company? Do you understand what's the big picture? So when we talk about culture, you can see my body language is totally different because it's the number one thing that's affecting the agility. And so the whole series that we're talking about is how to accelerate Agile, right? And culture, we talked about it a lot last time as well, and that's where the silos stem from the culture and the mindset. So the culture is what is influencing the silo, and a big thing or a request or a suggestion or a guidance, whatever you want to take it as, my thing to the leadership. And leaders are in every level, right? You have team, program, portfolio, enterprise, doesn't matter. Leaders at every level, ask yourself this question: if you are influencing the right culture, and if you cannot say with confidence that you're not, then that's the first step that you need to take towards changing that. Get out there, talk to the people, understand, do an assessment. Exciting Solutions has, the assessments available too. So it doesn't matter, some kind of assessment where you can just spend 10 minutes to understand where your organization is, which way they are going, what the teams are saying. Take that feedback and make that into a program, backlog. Have maybe a Kanban board for yourself, right? And then put those together and prioritize them. You have, you go to a conference, you talk about your quarterly goal, your annual goal or whatnot. Make these as priorities as well, and get to them. Talk to the people about these things and enable, and make sure that the decisions, break them down into centralized versus decentralized decision. Help everybody understand where you want to go, and tie your OKR all the way from the top to the bottom.
And that's a really good point, because you know what? Not every organization is going to get a chance to play undercover boss, right? We all wish that we could have someone who's up here or somewhere here come actually see what's going on. So in lieu of that, what I'm hearing from you as a takeaway is prioritize the ability to assess not your PI, not your scope, but what kind of silos you have. And so with that said, and before we get to key takeaways, Bhavani, I've got one 30-second request for you. If folks can go do something, say they hear this webinar and they're like, I'm excited, I want to do something in my organization. What is one thing folks could go do today that could get this ball rolling?
Start your assessment. That's where I will start. That's where I always start, whether it is your, Agile team happiness or whatnot. Just start the assessment to understand where your people are. There you go. Start with the happiness, the team happiness, and see where they are.
How often should you assess, Bhavani? How often should organizations be checking on this?
So I would say anywhere between, every quarter. Try every quarter, see how that works, and get your numbers and see if a team that has scored higher on your happiness metric is really going down, or are they growing towards, is it upwards or downwards? Check your trend.
Fair enough. All right, so I just want to do a synopsis summary of what we've talked about, and then would love to take some questions. But at the end of the day, we are wrapping up a 3-part series. You and I chatted about the nuts and bolts, ceremonies. You've got to get them down. This is just like football, blocking and tackling. And then you buy into the big picture and you look at culture and you're saying, we are all heading in one direction, that NASA mission control type of analogy. And then we say, all right, we've bought in, we know the nuts and bolts. but we're still sort of divided because we have different aspirations. And what I've heard from you today, and you can keep me honest again, is start understanding what your roles are. Start understanding what your teams are supposed to be doing, how they can work together. What I'm hearing from you is even if you're a larger enterprise that's bimodal, for example, you've got to keep everyone in alignment. What I'm also hearing from you is politics is never going away, but you've got to find ways to start delving into it. And now, as you're saying, when you start looking at all of this, you start at the individual, but it's got to go all the way at the top. With all of this said, besides assessing where you are in organizational silos, what else are you going to leave our listeners with today?
So, Mason, it's, again, as I said, create that bridge, right? So put in liaisons. As you mentioned, it's not really possible for the leaders to, go down all the time and talk to and take the time, and that's fine, right? As I said, if you cannot break the barriers, at least create a bridge, right? Create liaisons that can bring it back to you and make them accountable, make them understand that this is as much, their problem as it is your problem, and it is affecting the organization as a whole. So, in creating, in steps towards creating holistic teams, you also have to understand what their problems are and start with that.
Great. And I just want to add one more thing. We've touched today on some high-level concepts, and I'm sure it was cathartic for a lot of folks on the phone who might have these issues in their organizations, but there are practical and tactical steps, as Bhavani's mentioning, that you can start taking, because it's easier to say, I want to talk to my other teammates or other leaders and start creating this assessment or start looking at these things quarterly, but you've got to find a way to start. And Bhavani and we're in the DC area. If you'd like to speak to us further or get some more ideas on this, we definitely are available to chat on it. I just wanted to mention that before we went to questions. And as we said in the beginning of the webinar, there are some tactical things that Bhavani could provide that we could send out as well. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Kelly. I appreciate it, Bhavani. Let's see what folks are asking.
Great. Thanks, Mason and Bhavani, both for your time and input on that. So we have a couple questions that have come in. If you have any additional that you've thought of during the conversation, please feel free to go ahead and type those into the Q&A section on your platform, hit enter, and we'll get to all those. So the first one, I'm going to slightly paraphrase. Bhavani, this is for you. It says, you mentioned hire for attitude and cultural fit. Can you expand upon that?
Sure. This is actually one of the best practices recommendation coming from a scaled Agile framework. And what they say is, enterprises, when it comes to talent acquisition, should not only hire for the position or the role, right? They should also make sure that they are fit for their corporate attitude and they have cultural fit. Now, some organizations I have worked, they have this, cultural departments where, they come up with questionnaires and they come up with, assessments to put a candidate through. And I've actually worked as a cultural ambassador as well. And, after the candidate has gone through the technical rounds or, so usually after the technical rounds, they come to the cultural side, and then we kind of try to assess them on the cultural fit, because, you want to be able to build a stronger employee base, right? And that is not just, towards just getting them in terms of for their skill set. And that's okay. You can bring them just for their skill set. They could be a star developer, they could be a star tester, they could be a subject matter expert in that area. But then, if they cannot get along with the team, then there goes your cultural harmony. And you have brought somebody who is so divisive that does not even want to work as a team. And again, Agile is such a team-based culture, right? So you really, really have to be careful about who you're bringing in. And if that person is, if that person has the attitude to learn and grow and teach and, become a part of the team. So that's really important. And that's what I mean. And we can actually share some, resources that can directly take them to what I'm talking about.
Great, thank you for that. So I'll make sure we include those resources for you all when we send out the webinar link later tomorrow. So the next one, Bhavani says, how do you support impactful learning and growth as a leader? Can you comment on that for us?
Sure. Again, this, was one of the best principles or one of the themes that comes from SAFE as well, the Scaled Agile Learning Framework. When they say support impactful learning and growth, they're talking about, it's really important for you to create a learning organization. And, where the employers and the employees kind of, the employers empower the employees to take the lead, right? But we also have to be careful in terms of not to incentivize, somebody like a team lead. And when you do that, it kind of sends the wrong message where, so I'm incentivizing the team lead because he or she is the lead of the team. That's not what we're saying, right? We're talking about where, when they're coming to work, they're also taking charge of their own development. They have more opportunities to grow into the path or the career path. And this, kind of breaks down when you have a team that has, maybe 80% of contractors and 20% of FTEs where, all the focus is only on the FTEs and the vendors or the contractors are more just required to just, come and do your job and go. But even in those situations, maybe the contractors coming from the vendor company, could do a better job of creating a career path for them. Because at the end of the day, I don't know if you guys remember, we talked about, the rate of disengagement in the world, right? It's just 13% of people are satisfied with their jobs. And, the rest are disengaged. It's just ridiculous numbers. It's such an alarming number. And that all stems from, the absence of a career path, the absence of somebody to motivate them to the next level. And earlier we talked about, can a PM not become a Scrum Master? We're not saying that, right? But is that the right career path for them? Is that, has there been learning opportunities? Has there been, learning moments and created for them to flourish in that role, to grow into that role? So if a PM is becoming a Scrum Master, have they gone to or have you empowered them to go to the right types of trainings? And have they been able to, go through mentorship? Do you have communities of practices set up in your organizations? So that's what I mean. And again, even for this one, we can send the resources or links in our resource section so they can learn a little bit more on that.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like that's our last question that has come through. I want to encourage you guys, you have my contact information. If you have additional questions at any point for Mason or Bhavani, please feel free to send me an email. I'll get it right to them and we'll get your questions answered. Also, as a reminder, we'll send this link out to you tomorrow so that you can share this with your teams. We hope this was beneficial. We've also referenced the 2 previous parts of our webinars. We talked about culture, we talked about ceremonies. Please feel free to check those out as well. If you have any questions, we're always here to help. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you. See you all.